could we go to the video, and then we'll begin with the questioning. So I think Mr. Cummings and I both have seen it enough, but for some who have not seen it, I want to get it into the record. And this is a short clip. It won't be the whole thing, but it sets a tone. Lacey, I know you haven't seen this.
Line. We're trying to get ready for Anaheim. Stay in line.
Have you seen Faris? Where is Faris?
Attempting to modulate the frequency now. The no taxions, lack of skilled tax leaders, has resulted in a widespread case of confusion, uninformed taxpayers, high noncompliance, no strategic vision. I'm afraid without a wealth of skilled leaders, anarchy is spreading across the planet like a virus. Shall I wear a ski cap to cover my ears, Captain?
Nah, your ears are fine. But you gotta loosen up, Fink. Play a little wee once in a while.
I'm sure many more will watch that, and some will laugh. My questions are, what a surprise, and I'll start with Mr. Fink. What were you thinking? Were you thinking this will never be seen? Or were you thinking, how will this look when it is seen? Please start the clock. Please speak close to the mic. We couldn't hear.
Mr. Chairman?
You're not on.
Mr. Chairman, those videos were, at that time they were made, were an attempt to, in a well-intentioned way, use humor, the Star Trek video to open the conference. The dance video was used to close the conference. They would not occur today based upon all the guidelines that exist, and frankly, they were not appropriate at that time neither, Mr. Chairman. And the fact of the matter is it's embarrassing, and I apologize. Those videos, I noticed in the Inspector General's report there is not a clear delineation of the cost of both the videos, but they are embarrassing, and I regret the fact that they were made.
Well, let me do a follow-up question, because part of the most concerning part of the IG's report is it appears as though at the IRS, both in this and other cases, we can't count on proper accounting of what money is spent on what. There were at least many cases in which people traveled for conferences during this entire period, and as far as I know today, in which if they simply bill it as travel and not as conference travel, then it won't be seen as conference travel. How are we to know, and obviously without receipts and even a missing painting, how are we to know that these kinds of changes have occurred to where there's a auditable train of where money was spent?
Mr. Chairman, to respond to that question, of course, it's already been spoken that there's been many changes at the IRS. One of the changes at the Internal Revenue Service is around the tracking of expenses, around conferences, meetings, and training. For the particular conference in Anaheim, we were only able to track 90% of the costs. There's a variety of reasons that the other 10% were not accurately tracked. It's because people did not use the tracking code that was in place. It's also that folks were on other travel, visiting offices, doing things of that nature, did not use the conference tracking code, and may have charged their expenses to another code for another business purpose.
Well, the reason I ask that is twofold. First of all, if I did it as a business and thus couldn't account for receipts, wouldn't your inspectors say disallowed?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Our auditors would look at records. They do have some discretion as far as the reasonableness of the records that are submitted, but we take very seriously the role that we occupy in ensuring that people have the appropriate business records. This year, example that you have provided, we only did have 90% of the information as far as the expenditures.
Now, if I were to have local folks get hotel rooms and meals and so on, and not issue a W-2, I made a fairly serious allegation as a layman I'm not saying that it's the law exactly, but I could characterize it as tax evasion. If a company didn't do it and the employees, particularly let's just say that they're accountants and very knowledgeable of the law, didn't do it, there were no W-2s, no 1099s, essentially no accountability for this revenue that's supposed to be taxed, what would you do in that case?
In that case, Mr. Chairman, as pointed out in the Inspector General's report, you have to look at each situation case by case. And in that particular situation, you would look at the individual facts that existed in that situation. In the matter that you're referring to here is we now have issued W-2s to all of what we characterized as being local travelers after it was brought to our attention by the Inspector General and in their report that we had not appropriately accounted for all the local travelers, sir.
I appreciate that, Mr. Kuntz. I guess I'll characterize it to you. It was not in the tax year in which it was earned, so the employees did not voluntarily file, as far as we know. I know that's not available to the public, but the employees didn't take it on themselves. Knowledgeable people about taxes to say, oh, I've got to pay taxes on this. The employer did not issue the required tax statement to itself, if you will. I characterize it as tax evasion because it can't just be swept under the rug. These were knowledgeable parties on both sides, weren't they?
Yes, I mean, IRS did not issue W-2s, and in fact, we found 7 people that they didn't identify that were local that actually traveled. So those would have been some of the ones that didn't get W-2s. Now,
I'm going to just close with one quick question. I know because not only do we have votes, but I want to be sensitive to the time. I've worked with event planners, and whether it was an event planner inside the IRS, which it should have been, or the ones that were hired, there does seem to be a little sleight of hand. They received a commission based on the more that was spent, the more they received. And apparently they, as I understand from your report, they got free rooms for FAM trips, for familiarization trips, while IRS employees paid for the rooms. Again, as far as I can tell, that increased their commissions while lowering their unreimbursable cost. Is that roughly right?
That would be right. IRS also received, I think, 10 comp rooms per night, but most of the upgrade rooms IRS had, they paid the $135 per diem rate for.
And have you done any work to look at comparables from other associations? I headed the Consumer Electronics Association, puts on the CES, but I also was on smaller associations. Have you done any work to figure out what the comp would be? I couldn't find that there, and I want to not cast any blame on the various hotels, because if somebody comes and says, this is what I want, it's not your job to make the dumb smart if you're on the selling side.
No, what we looked at is that they could have actually potentially negotiated the room rate down from $135, as you mentioned, rather than solicit the 25-plus VIP suite upgrades per hotel. So they actually went out and said, we'll pay you full per diem, which is the most they could pay. And then they said we wanted to have various amenities, including the suite upgrades.
And I said last, but with the ranking member's indulgence, there was a mention of rooms, various rooms that are various food that was provided. IRS employees received full per diem, of course. Did you have a substantial amount of per diem returned as a result of their getting meals, which would be the law? In other words, you're not entitled to keep the per diem if you didn't have to use it because others provided you meals.
Actually, federal travel regulations do not require employees to deduct that from their per diem, but we did do a statistical sample, and all the employees in our sample got full per diem of $71 per day, even though they received the continental breakfast. But there was nothing wrong with that according to federal travel regulations.
It just smells real bad.
Well, we essentially paid for breakfast twice, probably, Mr. Chairman.
But negotiating paying for breakfast and then paying full per diem created a situation in which they got overpaid, basically.
Not technically according to federal travel regulations, but again, from a taxpayer perspective, they got breakfast and the government paid them for breakfast at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much.